The Pharisees and scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem and said, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat." Now, a terrible misconception we have in Christianity is that grace and love is somehow in conflict with obedience to the law. They think that Jesus abolished the law because we're currently what they call under the age of grace. But as we learn in Matthew 5, the complete opposite of that is true. So we'll jump back to Matthew 5. "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of these least of the commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." So the question is, why did the Pharisees and scribes at that time suspect that Jesus was abolishing the law? And more importantly, why do preachers today think that Jesus came to abolish the law? It's because what he was actually tearing down was all the ridiculous, unnecessary, and man-made traditions and rituals which had grown up like thorns around the law, around the Bible. Now, we talked earlier about the Catholics and how they have a capital T tradition. They weren't the first priests to do this. The Jews did it long before they did. It's called the Mishnah. When the temple was destroyed and the Jews were dispersed into Babylon, they no longer had a temple where they could do sacrifices for their sins. Now, since they couldn't have a sacrificial system, they're terrified of ever falling into sin. So what they did is they would create boundary lines that were so much further away from the Ten Commandments than what the book actually said. They made all sorts of things illegal for them to do that the Bible never even said you're not allowed to do. Further, there's also a very racist element to a lot of the Jewish tradition back then that Jesus wanted to squash as well. For them, they alone were the children of God. Everyone else, Gentiles, we're just dogs. In fact, we're going to address that in our lesson next week. So many of these extra laws and traditions that developed were basically developed just to keep Jews and Gentiles completely separate, keep a wall between the two of them. But later, Jesus will be asked by someone, "Teacher, what is the great commandment in the law?" And he said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets." So the Mishnah traditions weren't this in action. They were actually the opposite. They served to push people away from God. All these crazy rules made people want to have nothing to do with God, and they certainly made them to not want to have anything to do with their neighbor. It created prejudice and division between people. What Jesus was telling these religious people was basically, I have not come to do away with anything in the Bible. Not the Old Testament, not the New Testament. But I have come to do away with your denominational nonsense, which gets in the way of real Christianity. All right, now, this is one of the examples with the washing of the hands. The Torah doesn't say anything about people washing their hands before they eat. Nothing. Now, if you go to Leviticus 22, verses 6 to 7, it does talk about ceremonial washing that the priests are supposed to do before they handle an offering, but it says nothing about normal people during normal meals. So Jesus couldn't care less about following their tradition. His desire was to fulfill this, the greatest commandment. God gave us the law so that we could love Him and care for one another. Man, on the other hand, creates religions and traditions where their religion becomes more important than loving God, and it becomes more important than caring for our fellow man. And this is exactly what Jesus came to destroy. He was in no way tearing down God's law. He was actually reestablishing it. He says, "You hypocrites." He's quoting Isaiah 29:13. When he prophesied of you, when he said, "This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men."